Are we live? We're live? All right. Everybody hear me? All right. We'll go back to the second group. I want to apologize to our live stream listeners and watchers. We had a power failure that we got corrected, so hopefully that won't happen in this session. We've made some changes. Hopefully we won't have any trouble. This panel is a little unusual in regard to, well, I'm just going to let it speak for itself. I'll introduce you to Kathleen Hayes Hill. Kathleen is Jim's wife. Kathleen is the closest thing that Foy and Hal Proctor ever had to a granddaughter. And her mother was the closest thing that they ever had to a daughter. And we're very fortunate to have Kathleen and Jim both here today because not much has ever been talked or said about Mrs. Proctor, and maybe we can get some insight to the power behind the storm from her. Also, we have the daughter of another storm named Georgia Welch Burns, and she's going to give you a little bit of an update about Buster and maybe some insight about Buster. So I'm going to turn it over to Terry, and you can pick who you want first.
Again, thank you, Pat. Again, we apologize for the power outage, and so I wanted to real quick tell anybody that's joining us on the World Wide Web that after this section, we will take a quick break for dinner here tonight, but we will be back on, so give yourself maybe 40, 50 minutes, a little break there, but be sure and come back and join us. So without further ado, you know, I was sitting here visiting with Georgia, and she's going to give you a little update on Buster, but I'm going to tell you a funny story on him, and it's been several years back, and he joined us up here on the stage, and what just an unbelievable guy. And it was a pleasure to be able to share the stage with him. But I asked Buster, I said, Buster, do you remember the best horse that you've ever been on? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I remember that. I said, what do you remember the worst horse that you're ever on? He said, oh, yeah. He said, I really remember that. So, Georgia, tell us, and your mic's up there, tell us, give us an update on Buster. What a great guy.
Well, Dad is 93 this year, turned 93 in May, and we've had a little health setbacks, but he's been a very active man, and he has no give up in him. And I'm going to give you a perfect example. In December, he has a scooter that he rides everywhere on, a little motor operated scooter, and through miscommunication, the family thought he was at the ranch, the employees thought he was in town with the family. After 3 days, we talked to each other, and nobody had seen him or heard from him. So my brother runs into Abilene, and the front door is wide open, and Ken goes in the house and calls for him and doesn't find him. He looks outside, and he sees him, and he's leaned up on his little scooter up against the back door, screen door, just leaned up there. So Ken walks out there and says to him, Dad, no answer. So he reaches and touches him on the shoulder, and there's no answer. And Ken reaches, and his left hand is just swollen huge and just cold as ice. So Ken steps back to say a prayer, and all of a sudden he hears, Mr. Ken, I sure need some water. Dad had been out there for 3 days and 2 nights in 22 degrees weather. My brother Ken went and got him some water and called 911, and the first thing they told him was, don't let him have any water. And Ken said, I'm not taking it away from him. So we took him to the hospital. 2 days, he was fine. The doctor said all we can figure is he hibernated. So what he had done is that he had ridden his scooter out of the front porch, gone around to get something out of his car in the driveway, had come back to the front porch, couldn't get his scooter up on the front porch. So he goes around and he opens a big iron gate. We don't know how he got open, but he got up on the back porch and opened the screen door and realized he didn't have a key to that door. So he went to back up. He got high centered. There was no rubber left on the tires. I mean, he had just given it up. So when we finally realized that he was okay, and my brother Ken kind of scolded him and said, "Dad, when you saw you couldn't get back on the front porch, why didn't you go down to the highway and get some help?" And Perfect Buster Welch says, "I didn't need any help." So he's still that way. He still doesn't think he needs help. But if anybody gets a chance to go by and see him, please do. He loves visitors, and he remembers everything from about 1940 to about 1970. So if you've got any stories for him, please go see him. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, they always say ladies first, so we'll go down to Kathleen. And I think you were going to share a story about growing up. And before you start that, let me preface that a little bit, because she told me a while ago, she said, when I do this, I get a little emotional. And I said, well, I'm a big crybaby too, so it'll be okay. So go ahead.
Well, Mr. and Ms. Proctor were very part of my life, always. But what I came to talk about was Ms. Proctor. She was she was of the social scene in Midland, and a bridge player extraordinaire. I don't know if any of y'all play bridge, but she was a grand master. It's a metal card. It looks like a credit card, but it has Hal E. Nobody ever knew what E stood for. She would never tell. Proctor. And anyway, she traveled Europe playing bridge all over, she was always quite the lady, and she loved coming up there, her and Mr. Proctor did, and for Mom to cook, because Mom was a good cook. And they always enjoyed eating and having, and then she also, when they were there, if the weather permitted, they always rode. And I have several pictures of her horseback. And one specifically when she was much younger in Arizona, she cut quite a trail with her Palomino horse and her tall boots, and she was quite the lady. That's all. I'm gone.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Johnny. And I heard something earlier about, I believe, we got to think back 26 years ago, and they did a surprise birthday party for you. You want to tell me about that?
Are you talking to me?
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. I said John. I meant Mike. I apologize, Mike.
Well, tell me the question again. I'm sorry. You were talking to Johnny.
Yep, but no.
I thought you was looking at me.
I got the story on one of you, and I can't remember which one it was. I think it's on you, Mike.
All right, I'm straight.
Yeah, it's about your birthday party 26 years ago when you turned, was it 50? And did they pull a little surprise on you?
Yeah.
And everybody showed up, long-term friends, family, people that you had no idea that were going to come.
Yeah, I saw a different side of my bride. She'd hid this from me all this time. I don't know how she got it all done, but I got an invitation. Well, Bill Finney and I, sitting right there, got an invitation to meet a young man that was marrying a girl from Borden County, there where I live. But we were the only ones that got an invitation. It worked out because when we pulled up there that morning, it was a Saturday morning, and I had to pump out a cesspool, and I had a little Boyd pump, and it locked down on me. So I had that to deal with, and then I got in the house, and we had a bunch of honeybees up in the chimney that had just begun to make themselves known. And so I built a fire. You know, this was in June. So I built a fire and run them out. And I told Susan, I said, I deserve a nap. I'm going to take a nap. She said, well, we have this deal to go to, but I got down on the floor, and after a while, she punched me and said, I'm really looking forward to this party. And I said, okay, all right, we'll go. Then, so we got up and got there, and there was lots of cars there. I didn't, just thought, well, it's big turnout for this thing. And when I stepped in the door and began to looking around, I saw one of the first guys I saw I hadn't seen in 25 years. And it just went from one to the other, and so she got all that together and kept me in the dark the whole time, and it was one of the great surprises of my life.
Let's go down to Joel. You earlier you were telling me you had a story that you wanted to tell.
Not really a story, just kind of a reminiscence. I was at that birthday party.
Yeah.
I think Dennis was there too. There's a bunch of us there. My dad was a ranch cowboy for a lot of years. I worked on the pitchfork back in the 30s and worked for the Boone Ranch east of Seymour, where I grew up, till I was up in grade school. So I spent a little time horseback with my dad back then. Then he went to work as a deputy in Bader County, and we moved to the Bader County Jail. And that's kind of where I grew up till I finished high school, and I got kind of pulled away from being able to spend much time horseback growing up in town there. Went to Stephen F. Austin University and went to college there for 2 years. And then my third year, my junior year of college, I went to Sul Ross because we had a cooperative program and I needed to go somewhere and get some range management courses out of the way. So I ended up at Sul Ross in 1966, 67. And that's where I met Mike and Tom, Tom's brother Bob. I think John had already transferred up to Tech by that time. Another fellow named Tom Melton, who's not here tonight, but those guys changed my life. They gave me something to look up to. And Tom invited me at the end of the spring semester to be on the roundup crew helping Gage Holland work calves. We started the day after spring semester was over, if I remember right. And I was not the best hand in the world. Well, let me modify that. I didn't know much. Let me modify that. I didn't know anything.
No,
I didn't know anything.
not quite.
But I guess Tom and Mike and Bob thought, this guy acts like he really wants this. Why they let me ride with them, I don't know, but they did. And so I went back to Stephen F. Austin, got my degree, went to work punching cows up until I was sent to Vietnam. I got back from Vietnam in 1970 and got back to Alpine, Texas as quick as I could and hooked up with Mike Stevens, who was working on the Coconut 06 Ranch at the time. And Mike said, if you want to help through the fall roundup, maybe there's an opening. Buzz Nichols was running the place at the time, and Buzz says, yeah, I can use you. He says, I'll pay you $6 a day. If you'll take a string of broncs, I'll pay you $8 a day. All I could see was the dollar signs. But went through that roundup, with Mike, and John Roberts was working there on the place, and John and I pulled some pretty good stunts on Mike during that roundup, but I didn't come here to tell stories. I told Sylvia on the way up here today, I've got to be in Lubbock in a couple of weeks at the Ranch and Heritage Center, a little function, and I've got to say some things there. And what I said today is part of what I was going to say there, and I'm going to anyway. But in 1970, when I got back from Nam and started punching cows again, I made myself a kind of a personal goal to aspire to. I want to be like Tom and Mike and Tom and Bob. That's the kind of guys that I want to be like. I want to try my best to get as good as they are at what they do. And I've been plugging away at it for 50 years now, and I don't know how far I've come, but I know I got a ways to go. So thank you guys for changing my life.
Can I tell a story?
You bet. Thank you all. Let's go down to Johnny Ferguson now.
Well, like I said, I'm not a storyteller, but I'm going to tell this one on Mike Stevens. Mike and I are friends and have been for a long time. One year we went up to Casper, Wyoming, Tom and Mike and I, and we had a ranch leased up there, and we were coming home, and we got to Cheyenne. It was in Tom's pickup, but we had some mechanical problems with his pickup. And we stopped there in Cheyenne at the dealership, and they said, well, it's going to be 4 or 5 days before we can get it fixed. Well, we had a trailer load of horses and all of our stuff, and so we kind of made arrangements for a place to leave our horses. And at that time, they was expecting a big thunderstorm in Cheyenne, so all the rent-a-cars, we'd made a plan that I'd left my pickup at Vega, and we were going to drive to Vega and get my pickup where I was and then come back and get them. Well, the rent-a-car places, they had all their cars, they moved them somewhere else because they didn't have covered parking, and they was afraid they were going to get held on. So the Ford dealership where we left Tom's pickup said, well, we'll rent you a car, but you have to bring it back here to Cheyenne. So they did, and it was this little bitty car. I mean, and here we are, cowboys, you know. We didn't like riding that little car. For me, I didn't anyway. But Tom, being like Tom is, we was going to meet John Welch in Colorado at his ranch and leave Tom there. Well, Tom said, well, I need my saddle. I'm going to John's. I'll need to help him. And then he said, I'm going to need my bedroll. And I said, Tom, there ain't room to put all that in this little car. So we did squeeze his saddle in. And he said, well, I can tie that bedroll on top of this car. And we can. I said, no, I don't. I mean, John's got covers. You'll be okay. But anyway, Mike and I drove to Colorado, dropped Tom off, went to Vega, got my pickup, turned around and went back to Cheyenne. And that next morning, just kind of a non-stop trip. And then we pulled up there to this lady's house where we left her horses. And I said, Mike, let's rest our eyes just for a minute. It was about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. And I mean, as soon as I said that, Mike, he went to snoring. He wore out. I was too. But anyway, we slept for an hour or so, loaded our horses and headed back home or back to Vega, and was going through New Mexico. And I was in the passenger side. Mike was driving at that time, and Mike slaps me on the arm, and he said, Johnny, we're getting pulled over. So I look in the mirror, and it's a pickup. I said, well, it's a pickup. It's not a cop. I said, maybe the brand inspector or something. I don't know. Because we had a trailer load of horses. And I said, Mike, tell them that we left the health papers in Tom's pickup, and I was giving him the full story in Cheyenne. We don't have health papers. We don't have all the stuff. And he said, okay. Well, this lady walks up to the side of the pickup, and that's the first thing she asked for. And Mike said, ask him about it. He wasn't going to lie to her. I mean, I was telling him all the lies to tell, and so he sicked her on me. And anyway, we made it, and everything was okay. That is off the hook. But we made it back to Vegas. It was a 1,500-mile trip there in about 24-hour period, but we made her home.
I ran into that lady the other day again.
Oh, you did? Well, it's funny. It's funny how things are, but we'd been up there, had that ranch, and we called it Poison Spider. Well, we got to talking to her, and she said, "Where y'all been up there in Wyoming?" We told her. She said, "Y'all been to the Poison Spider Ranch?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, we have." She said, "Well, I've been seeing that on Facebook." So she had somehow, with some of the guys that was up there working, had seen it all. So she kind of believed her story anyway. It wasn't all true, but most of it was.
Mike, let's come back to you because you always thought that the Schwan guy just delivered food, but I think you had a story about that.
Yeah, I got a lot of help out of a Swan guy one time. Down there in Borden County, and had 3 dry cows. We'd had them in a what we called a bull pasture, and it was real brushy. And so when it come time to ship those things, well, them didn't come out. And I'd fool with them after that several times, and they'd just splatter on me. And so, you ask the Lord for help, every day, and to watch over you. I don't think a person ought to be surprised whenever you do get some help that you don't expect. So I was trotting across there one morning thinking about that and trying to figure out some way to do it. And this little plan started coming into my mind. I'll go down there. Had a laned road there that kind of split the ranch, and there wasn't a whole lot of traffic on it. So I thought, well, I'll get them out there maybe and just see what happens. And I don't remember how I got the gate open, but I got around them, and they started that way. They came from over on the west side anyway. And they went right down the fence, and I think there was a guy came by, and I said, he was going north, and I said, "There's a gate down there," and I asked him to open it. So those cattle came out on the lane, and they were way ahead of me. And they turned north just like they needed to, but I'm half a mile behind them. There's not a thing I can do. I'm just loping along trying to catch up. And in the meantime, it's not that far from the house, and the landlord still lived there, and they used the Swan man. He would bring them stuff. And so I heard him, and I don't know if all those Swan trucks sound like this one, but it sounded like a tank, that made so much racket. And so those cattle were going along up there ahead of me, and I'm not figuring out how in the world they're going to get turned before they get to Gale, which wasn't another 12 or 15 miles up the road. And that guy pulls away from the house, and where he comes onto the highway, it's just about a quarter of a mile down there to where that gate is. And so I thought, well, he's going to run them over the fence or run them over me. I don't know how this is going to come out. But he turned, and they stopped right there where the gate was. And they were looking west, because that's where they came from. And he just kept coming, and they looked up at him and hearing all that. And then all of a sudden, they just looked over and saw that open gate and went right through it into a trap and run down there in the corner. And I'd kind of caught up by then. And they just sit there, and there was a lane going to the pens. So they gave up. They just went right straight down there, went in the lot, and I slammed the gate. Thank you, Swan man.
Being over in Borden County there at Gale, and there was a guy that shared the stage up here years ago by the name of John Anderson.
Yeah.
John was inducted as a Floyd Proctor honor recipient, but he was telling me the story about when he got married. And you have to think back 44 years ago. You're probably at the wedding, I don't know, but his dad, Rich, who was also, I believe, an inductee here as well, had told John, he said, if you know a good band that you want to bring them down to play for the reception, won't you hire a band? He said, well, we used to listen to this guy at San Marcos that we liked a lot. So he calls George Strait, And George tells him, he said, you know, it's a long ways from San Marcos to Snyder. I'd have to have at least $700. And Rich said, well, we can do that. Well, several years later, his sister got married. And Rich told John, he said, hey, that guy you had come play for the wedding, he said, I kind of liked him. He said, won't you get him to come back for your sister's deal? And by that time, George had a record go to #1. And so John called him. And he said, John, he said, I don't have any control over that anymore. It all goes through the agency. And he said, well, how much would it be? He said, $70,000. He said, my dad ain't going to go for that. You're not coming to Borden County. Anyway, I thought that was a great story that he told back then. Let's go back for a minute and talk about Buster for a second. If any of you ever had the opportunity to go to Amarillo to the AQHA museum up there, you'll see Buster's name on the wall up there. But I guess, Georgia, I want to know, in looking back at your childhood, and tell me one of the greatest or fondest memories that you have from, because I know y'all traveled all over the country. And so tell me one of the fondest memories that you have that you shared with Buster.
Well, we did. We traveled a lot, and I got to go a lot of places and meet a lot of people. But my greatest memories with Dad was just him being a person, him being a father, him being a grandfather. That was the best. And the perfect example of that is my son Dawson, who my dad almost raised. We were there with him all the time. And I worked for Dad, and we were working for the King Ranch, and we were riding horses. And I was in the arena loping horses, and one of the guys that worked for us come running out of, just a dead run on a horse, coming out of the pasture. And I thought, boy, something's happened, because he knows better than that. And so I said, Don, what is it? And he said, Georgia, you got to come with me. Dawson's with your dad. And I said, I know. And he said, no, come on. So we took off, and I get up, and we were at the ranch at Trent, which at that time we called them mountains, but they were hills. But they were steep, and they were rocky. And I look up, and my dad is coming down the mountain with some crazy mules driving the team, and he has my son wired into the seat. And I just sat at the bottom of the hill and prayed. And they got to the bottom, and I said, Dad, why would you wire him to the seat? And he said, because I knew he wouldn't fall out. And I said, but how did you know the wagon wasn't going to roll? And he said, because I was driving it. And so I looked at my son, and his eyes were big. And I said, are you okay? And he goes, yeah, Papa, can we do it again? So, those are the memories to me with Dad, is everybody knows him as the cutting horse guy and the ranching guy. But to me, he was Dad and he was Pawpaw. And he has been a terrific Pawpaw. His grandkids adore him. And so do we kids. We adore him. But he would always tell us when we would try different things. And at one time I was playing basketball, and he started trying to tell me how to do it better. And I said, you've never played basketball? And he said, no, but I used to work in a basketball factory. So everything that we did, he would say, well, I used to work in a barrel horse factory. Well, I used to work in a rope factory. So we always listened to him because he had been there, he had done that. But he had pretty good advice, so we were pretty smart listening to him.
You talking about him saying, let's do that again. It kind of reminded me, and maybe it's where Red Stiegel got the poem where he talks about having the grandson out there, and the boy ropes a calf, and it just drags him through the mud, and the mom saw a wounded child, and he thought he was a hero, and said, why did you do that? He said, because my pawpaw said I could. So, yeah, everybody remembers that story. Mm-hmm. Johnny, let's come back down to you one more time. Let's talk about just growing up and the changes that you've seen take place, you know, from now we see guys horseback with a cell phone stuck to their ear or a laptop computer in their truck. Where do you envision this going from? I mean, y'all still do it the old way, but where do you see this thing going?
Well, I don't know. You know, I'm a little bit old school about things, but, you know, like for us, unless it's emergency, somebody, they're not going to be on their phone. I mean, it's just something I don't like to see, and you see all these young guys wanting to get out and play with their phones and stuff, and that's something that kind of annoys me personally. But, I mean, not that I'm that hard of a man, but I just don't allow that kind of stuff, you know, unless it, like I said, if somebody got a phone, it's fine, but it's just for emergency use, you know. But I have seen a lot of changes, and just, you know, I'm not that old, really, or I don't feel like I am, but I just, you know, in my career, it has changed a good bit. The way men work, there's a lot more horsemen now than there used to be. It used to be cowboys, and now there's more horse people, which is great. And I mean, I'm thankful for that, but you see a lot of more horse trainers, more of them than you do see cowboys sometimes, you know, and that depends what job you're doing, but it's kind of becomes annoying a little bit, you know, for sometimes when you're doing certain things. But
Are you seeing better horses, better cattle
oh yeah,
now?
Horses are a lot better, and cowboys are better horsemen than they've ever been. You know, I mean, there's a lot of good horsemen out there, but you know, like some things, like I say, I'm a little bit old school, but if you're working a herd or something, you don't want somebody out there training on their horse when you're doing that. Or if you're making a drive and you see somebody over there spinning their horse around, you know, those things, they just don't go too well for me. But that's just me talking. Hey, can I tell a quick story, though?
Absolutely.
John Morehouse kind of reminded me of this earlier, and I'm not a storyteller, like I said before, but I got thinking about this, and this is true, so I don't have to stretch it any and still kind of make it interesting. But one year we were camped out at a place we call the Beef Pens. We'd moved in there, and first night we were there, a skunk gets in bed with a kid, and it bites him right there on the bridge of his nose. Well, anyway, we killed the skunk. It was all during the middle of the night. Take him to town, and the skunk, they sent it off, and it is rabid. So the same night, one got in bed with my brother, but Charlie, he was cooking for us. So got in his teepee and didn't bite him, but got in bed with him. But the next night, one got in bed with another boy and bit him right in the armpit. And anyway, so we had these skunk attacks. So by then, everybody was panicking. Even my brother Charlie, he goes out there and finds some old bull wire and makes him a little fence around his teepee, you know, to block them off. But anyway, I had to pay for those shots. And Colt, the boy that got bit the first time, was about a 120-pound man, and Randy was about a 250-pounder. Well, they charge you by how much you weigh. So Colt's was half the price of Randy, so I thought, damn, I said, we're going to have to start hiring some smaller cowboys or something. I can't afford to do this. Or either that, I'm going to stake you out there to a tree till you see if you start slobbering or whatever happens. But anyway, it was kind of a heck of a deal. But I always said, you know, if I had a reputation for having wild cows or bad horses and nobody wanted to help me, that'd be fine. But when they don't want to come help you because they're afraid they're going to get bit by a skunk, you know.
Joel, come back to you one more time. That you know, you said that growing up, these guys were your mentors. And how do you repay somebody for something like that?
I never gave that any thought. You know, like I said, I always looked up to these guys that I went to Sul Ross with, and thought that's the kind of guys I want to be like. And I've never done anything for them, I don't guess, in the way of repaying them. But then I know that they didn't expect me to do anything other than try to be a little better at what I do. I do remember calling Tom and Mike both on the phone. This has been back in the early 80s. And I'd known them since 1966. But I'd never really asked either one of them for anything. I called Tom. I said, Tom, I need a favor. And I called Mike and I said, Mike, I need a favor. And I gave him a date. Don't have any idea when the date was, but will you give me 1 day of your time on that date? And didn't tell them what it was. But they said, yeah, I'll put it on my calendar. So when it got close, I gave Mike the details. Spent the night with Mike and Susan there in Borden County, and told Tom we'll meet you in Abilene, Texas, at the Coliseum. And there was a Ray Hunt colt breaking horsemanship clinic going on. I'd been exposed to that for a few years, and it had really advanced my horsemanship quite a little bit. It had advanced my cattle handling skills even more than my horsemanship, I think. But it was something that I knew they could both appreciate. So if I've ever done anything for either one of them, it would have been that, I guess. And I'm not sure how much it meant to either one of them, but I felt like it's something I can do because of what they've done for me.
I do want to say one thing that you alluded to earlier about going to Vietnam. And first, thank you for your service. We appreciate that. You guys, we had a tendency to forget some of those veterans, and just know that you guys are not forgotten, that we appreciate what you did. And I am sure that the time that you spent there going through your head was thinking about cows and horses and getting back to Alpine, Texas as quick as you could. So thank you.
That's exactly right. My draft board was at Benjamin, Texas, Tom. That's where I went in. Shipped us to El Paso. That's where we had to pull off all of our civilian clothes, put them in a box, send them home. And I hadn't given any forethought to how you pack a good set of riding boots and a felt hat in a box to send home with your clothes. And that's all I could think about. But before I went to Vietnam, I'd worked for the Nail Ranch out of Albany, Texas for J.H. Nail. And George Peacock had taken over the job as foreman. While I was in Vietnam, I got a package in the mail, a little box from George Peacock. And I thought, what in the world would George be sending me? I opened the box, and it was a little bit flattened out, a little bit misshapen. And my black hat.
Kathleen, let me come back to you for just a minute because I want to ask you, between what we're seeing on TV with RFD TV, they have really talked a lot about horse-type events around the country and pro rodeo. And then we have Yellowstone, which is now on TV. Some people love it, some people hate it. They're also, I guess, going to do a spinoff of that down on the 4-6s. Do you think that those things like that have helped our way of life of what we do and what we represent?
The funniest, the thing that comes to mind, it gives us something to laugh about. Because, come on, a heifer doesn't jump up and a 3-month-old calf run off first thing. But it does bring our way of life to most of the people. We are the minority of all. Ask people that don't know what end of a cow gets up first. No, they never thought about it. I think it's brought the cowboy lore, maybe not the day-to-day grind, because, you know, Yellowstone never seems to show that a little bit. But I think in a way it has helped because it's opened people's eyes up. But then so many people still think that where you get steaks is from the grocery store. Why would you need a ranch? You just go to the grocery store. So it's good in some ways. And I'm sure it has some, and some people obviously don't always like it, but it's amusing. And I think it's a good thing.
Might come back to you one more time, but I guess you really have to want to be down in Borden County. That's you're either going there or you're lost. And tell me how you ended up there.
Well, I was born there.
That's one way.
That's a really good reason to be there.
Yeah. Well, I was actually born in the hospital in Snyder, but we lived in Borden County. Actually, my dad worked many years for the Clayton ranches, but I think at the time, or maybe it was right after, he had some country leased in a ranch that belonged to the Hubbard family from up here. But there was a section out there that was individually owned and still is to this day, I guess. But he had it leased and had some other country. But we were in Lubbock for a time. I've always admired him for what he did. He was 50 years old when I was born. So he saw and did a lot of things that, you know, that I didn't come close to experiencing. But anyway, it was World War II, and so he was World War I vintage, and Arthur Clayton came and asked him to go take over that outfit because they couldn't get any help during the war. And of course the worms were bad, and he spent I asked him one time, I said, because it was just him and another guy or two, and they had horses scattered around. This was, 150 sections probably. And I asked him, I said, my gosh, Daddy, how do you get around there and get to all that? And he said, we just kept trotting. And that's what they did. But he wanted his kids to have some education. More so. Wanted them to go to college, in other words. And my brother and sister were a good bit older. I was just 2 years old when we moved, but he stayed there 5 years. I mean, he quit what he knew and went and got into a business, you know, that was, you know, he wanted to do it, but it was a sacrifice I always thought on his part because he was doing it for his kids. And the deal, we stayed up there 5 years, and the deal just didn't work out. It just flat didn't work. And my brother went on to the Air Force. My sister graduated from business college there. And I just started school when we moved back. In fact, the second half of my first grade year was, I finished at Gale. And grew up there from then on. I mean, does that answer that part of your question? That's why I'm there.
How many people were in your graduating class at Gale?
13.
13. How many guys, how many girls?
6 and 7.
6 guys, 7 girls. Your math is good. 6 guys, 7 girls?
Yeah.
All right. Hey, folks,
Let me tell one story.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I want to tell the story on Tom and Johnny that shows you the character of the men, really, and the strength. Johnny we were talking about this today, we were camped up there, working up there at Casper, and it was Johnny's birthday one day, and everybody here knows what happens on a birthday, you think, and so the scheme was running around through, and Brother Gary was supposed to be the head of it, they were going to get Johnny after supper when he left the fly. Go back to his tent. They were going to get him. And I was in my tent and I heard Gary go by. He was talking to some of them guys and he said, "Now, I'm going to run up and grab him, but don't y'all leave me by, y'all get there and help me with him." Well, Johnny knew all about this, come to find out. And when he came out from under the fly, he had a pot hook in his hand. And he went over to his tent and brought a chair out and sat down in front of it. And then he had a 45 full of rat shot in his lap. And he just sit there. He was kind of with his back to his tent and where nobody could sneak up on him, and he just sit there and he didn't say a word. He just looked at him like, "Come get me." Well, Johnny never got shot that day. We were camped in Hall County, the Morehouse wagon, and there was an old kid there. Always when we were branding in the spring, it was either right at the start or right at the end of Bob Will's day. And so there was an old kid in there, kept pestering Tom about going, can we go in? Or just let me go in? Or if you'll let me take the night horse. When I get back, I'll get the horses up. I'll have them ready by breakfast. And Tom said, "No, none of that." But he said, "I'll tell you what you do. This evening, there's a little hill out there. Go out there and get on it, and if the wind happens to be just right, you might catch a few bars of faded love."
Well, how about a nice round of applause for all these folks, huh? It's right at 6:30. I believe food is just about ready, Pat. Is it ready? So if you do me a favor and remove cover real quick, and we'll go to our Lord. Our gracious Heavenly Father, Lord, we just bow down before you today, and we thank you for these honorees. Lord, what great cowmen and just wonderful men and their life that they've had. We thank you for this group that's here today. We ask that you return them home safe and sound, and Lord, we can't forget our animals. We just thank you for allowing us to be caretakers of your livestock. And without good livestock, none of us could be the cowboys that we want to be. We ask that you bless this food to the nourishment of our body, and we thank you for your Son, Jesus Christ, who died on the cross to save us of our sins. We ask all these things in your blessed and holy name. Amen. Also, real quick, before we go, we'll tell our people watching us on the World Wide Web, we will be back in about 45 to 50 minutes, maybe an hour at max. So if you want to step away from your computer for a while, feel free to do so. But be sure and come back and join us. And for all of y'all that are sitting at a table, I believe there is a piece of paper on each table. If you want to call somebody and tell them to get on the World Wide Web, you can do that with what little piece of paper that's there. Pat, anything else?
Thank you again for being here. I want to thank John Scarborough for providing the brisket tonight. I hope it's as good as it's cracked up to be. I think it will be. Thank you, John.